Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to see such a full house, especially on the day we complete a year of Creative Mornings. We welcome you all. Thanks. So a little about today's speaker. We have Aliyeh Rizvi with us, who is the founder of The Native Place. And among many, many other things, she's an avid traveler, a writer, and a brand communicator. Most importantly, she aims at bringing awareness about culture and history, which is why she's here today to talk to us. And what we really like about her is the fresh perspective she brings to the scene of heritage of Bangalore. So yeah, it's my pleasure today to welcome on stage Aliyeh Rizvi.
Hi. Before I start, I just have a couple of questions to ask. I want to know how many of you here are Bangaloreans by birth? Is that 40%, 50%? 30%. How many of you are Bangaloreans by longevity? Like you've lived here really long enough to consider yourself Bangalorean? And how many of you are really, really new and Bangaloreans by attachment? Okay, fine. So for those who've, I think, been here and been around, a lot of what I'm saying may not be necessarily new. And I'm essentially a writer. I write on travel, heritage, and culture. And so I thought that I would take you through a journey. Because as writers, we're always concerned with, as travel writers, we're always concerned with this sense of place, where time and space, people's histories and geographies interact with human experiences. So this what, why is always something that we try and bring out in words. And so I thought that I'd take you on a journey of people and places and ideas of other people also that have profoundly impacted the way I now travel through Bangalore. And before I start, I just want to thank all of you for being here on a Sunday morning. Sundays are precious. And everyone at Canvas Creations, at the whole idea of Creative Mornings. And I want to thank my friend Nirlek Dhula, who's a photographer, who is not from Bangalore, but is now very much a part of the city, for his lovely images that you will see. Thank you for lending them to me. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bharat, for this lovely space. So I wanted to start by explaining, I'll just go back to that side. Why are we finding ourselves in between spaces? So essentially what I'm talking about is the past, which is rapidly disappearing now in Bangalore as we know it, and the present, which is a new Bangalore that has squeezed whatever's left of the past into small little pockets that are often difficult for people to find and navigate. Joining the dots has always been a problem. We have language. A lot of people are hesitant to enter old city areas and engage with local people because we have perceptions, fears, and most importantly, we really don't know how to navigate our way around this city anymore. New Bangaloreans, old Bangaloreans, we, I think, have lost a little bit of those navigation pathways because the city is becoming new to us every day. So this is about me and how I found my Bangalore in between, somewhere in between these two. So this is Kabbanpet. For all of you who walk through Bangalore and Avenue Road area, I also want to say my last thank you right now to Avenue Road area, which is a never-ending source of inspiration for me. And it's opened itself up to me, which is why I can talk a little bit about it to you today. So Kabbanpet, as you can see, was named after Sir Mark Cubbon. And one day, walking through Kabbanpet, I came upon Master Naganna. He's just Master Naganna, sitting in a zari dealer's shop. A lot of Bangalore, I found, happens just walking around, just sitting around. Bangalore happens to you. You just sit, and the city constantly works itself around you to welcome you in. But if you drive through it, it shuts its doors. This is what I have found. So the only way to really see Bangalore is to approach it on your feet. So Master Nagana, when I met him, told me that he is an Airtel franchisee and also into quote-unquote finance. Now, I don't want to speculate what that meant, but I'm sure we get a fair idea. So he was sitting in the shop in Kabanpet. It's very narrow lanes filled with Devanga weavers' looms and crumbling temples, silk shops, wholesale markets, and a lot of paraphernalia associated with the Pete's weaving industry. So when I met him, he spoke to me for a while. He looked just like any other ordinary inhabitant of Bangalore city. And then he walked into the garadi next door, right next door. And I followed. I had special permission to enter this testosterone-filled male bastion. It was new for them. When I was inside, my mother called me and she said, "Now where are you?" And I said, I'm in this akhara with 20 half-naked Hanuman bhakts in langotis. She said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I am." They're not, because they just didn't know what to make of me. They're Hanuman devotees. They have very strict codes of, physical propriety in these places. And here I was. So they were wonderful, though, very welcoming. And one of the things I want to tell you about Avenue Road is that when they sense that you are really interested in them and what is happening, they just open up. And it's a continuous process of discovery. One thing and one person leads to another all the time. So he walked into the garden, I followed, he took off his shirt, and he became someone else. So now he was suddenly Pehelwan Master Nagana, who taught other young devotees of the body in the Garadi more about themselves, about their own physicality. And as I don't know if all of you know what a Garadi is, it's a very, it's the equivalent of the North Indian Akhada, and largely found in the old city areas of Bangalore. And so he stepped into his traditional space, and it dramatically altered his body language. He was not just anyone anymore. He was someone. And even though, this is in the sacred matti, if you look at this picture in contrast to the other one, he's now a showman. He's showing off. This is a posed picture. He wanted to pose. And strangely, all of them really didn't mind being photographed in their loincloths at all, So no matter what body type, they were extremely comfortable with it. And so here, location and physicality were in complete harmony. It altered the way he perceived himself, and more importantly, it altered the way I perceived him. I couldn't imagine him now anywhere else, not in the modern Bangalore cantonment, built around 1809. He just belonged here. So a lot of you who work with experiences, with the mind-body connection, with the impact that spaces have on us as people will identify very strongly with this concept. It's not anything new. We've all experienced it at different points in our lives. Some of us experience it constantly. It's just that no matter how often it happens to me, I always find it powerful. So I wanted to understand this a little bit more, and then I realized that whenever we meet someone new, the first thing we ask them is, where are you from? Where do you live? It's always that, Maybe sometimes it's what do you do, but it's never really straight away what do you do. It's always, so where are you from? And it's probably because we want to establish, a mode of social interaction. And these are kind of defined usually by some common denominator. So we like believing that people from Mumbai are different from those from Calcutta and Kolkata. And people from North Bangalore are different from the South or the East. It may not necessarily be so, but we would like to believe it, so we ask these questions. So 200 years ago, Norman MacLeod was no different. So he lived in Bangalore, he wrote about it, his experience here in one chapter in his book, Peeps at the East, at the Far East. And he said the European quarters as different from the Petta as Belgravia's from the East End of London. And he was very glowing in his description of the cantonment, as you can see. He loved it, evidently, and he said there are broad roads. We don't know where they are now. And ladies and gentlemen, we don't know where they are now, too, ride by on horseback. And the last paragraph is what really caught my eye. He said, one catches a glimpse of a church tower or a steeple, and these things together with the genial air make one feel once more at home, at all events in a bit of territory which seems cut out of, again he uses the word home, and settled in India. So evidently, his experience of the cantonment made him believe temporarily that he was probably back home, which I assume would have been somewhere in England. And this was, I think, around the time when there was a physical divide between the Pete, or the Petta as he called it, and the cantonment. I mean, a lot of us are familiar with Bangalore's history. We know that they both existed in parallel. And for a while later, it was, the Petta was administered to by the Mysore state, and this was, more British administration on the cantonment side. There was a toll booth that was said to have existed along that divide. And back then, a lot of people from that side didn't come here, and a lot of people from here never went that side. So it created limited points of entry and departure from literally what was one world to another. And it also created limited perceptions. So now, here's what he has to say about the other side. And he doesn't use such glowing words anymore. So he says, the native city had nothing peculiar about it. We saw what we had so often seen before. Narrow, crowded streets, tumble-down houses. He is very descriptive about the dry cow dung. And, the bazaar, nothing different from what he's seen around India, he says, presided over by the same lanky, white-robed skeletons. And, of course, sheep or goats or cattle are, I believe, confined in these courts at night. And then, a little later, in 1924, Paul Byron Norris, who lived in Langford Town, felt that it was adventurous to cycle into the city in the evening, and it was appealing because the elders didn't approve of it. They feared that their throats would be cut or some unspeakable, actually it's atrocity, would befall us if we ventured beyond the safe British protected boundaries of the cantonment. So you see, actually, I'm not really sure if it was this, dark place of Oriental savagery as a lot of people imagined it to be. But if you really think about it, now, nothing much has changed in terms of perception of the space. People from this side are still reluctant to explore freely that side. So it's very need-based, task-based. You'll run in, aunt has come from Bombay, needs to buy a silk sari, where to go to Lakshmi Silks, come back. Nobody really spends time walking around these spaces. And on a personal level, for me, this is where I find my Bangalore now. So this is Avenue Road in 2011. It's more or less still the same. And when I say not much has changed, there are still invisible lines that divide us. The Pete still feels, forgotten by the administration. It feels a little alienated and ignored. It resents the cantonment for being what it perceives as being the showcase. And this side, the cantonment, continues to be intimidated by this space, by its cultural diversity, its population density, and the spatial incomprehensibility. So we reluctantly engage with Bangalore's and this area's traditional culture, tangible and intangible, people, customs, language, food, and so on. So Master Nagarna's Bangalore is also Bangalore. My Bangalore is also Bangalore. So the question is there space for both these Bangalores in Bangalore, and how does that happen? So I thought about it a little more, and when I met the Geshe in Bailakuppe, I was doing this story for the National Geographic Traveler on the lives of the monks and what it is like being Tibetan and following the culture of, arid mountainous regions in the flat, warm plains of the, areas in and around Mysore. Both are a dramatic contrast to each other, where they come from and where they live now. So, as we were talking, I asked him, I said, so how does it happen? How have you accommodated your traditional, identity and culture into this space? And he said, my problem is not about how we have adjusted a mountainous culture into a flat landscape. It's more about my worry, he said, is about what's going to happen to us when we go back. He said, how are we going to live in the mountains? Many people here, he said, almost everybody here has never been to Tibet. He said they have been born here. So in this case, the way they connected back to their identity, their personal and their social identity, was through recreating the physical. So Bailakuppe, the Serajay monastery, was built in a very close reimagined notion of its 15th century counterpart back in Lhasa. It was bombed by China in 1959 and destroyed completely. It doesn't exist anymore. But they built it. The materials, of course, are different. The form and, more importantly, the essence of it remained. And the monasteries have these little monastic houses, around it. They're also in the same image. And this physical bridge to their culture, the physical continuity, helped them create a sense of the familiar. It contributed to cultural familiarity with who they were as Tibetans and the establishment of emotional security in what for them might be a relatively alien environment. So this is how one community or a group of people chose to connect back to who they were. They chose to do this through the physical landscape around them. They built it and they exist among it. On the other hand, all symbolic spaces are not physical. So I came back to Bangalore, and this is one of my favorite places. A lot of you would know this very well. How many of you know this very well? How many of you been to the Karaga? Oh, okay. So, good. Now I can introduce it to you. So this is the Ranganathaswamy temple in Nagarthpet, okay? And the Karaga Shaktiyotsava is an annual event. It happens on a full moon night of Chaitra, and that's usually around April. And the people that you see here are largely, down there, are from the Tigala community. They are migrants who came to Bangalore centuries ago and settled in and around the Pete area, the market area. And they were traditionally horticulturists who grew produce for Bangalore. They had orchards and groves and plots that existed in that area. But over time, the city grew up. It grew over their traditional spaces, and so the tanks, the water bodies that they relied on for irrigation disappeared. And along with that loss of that physical space, their occupational identity also was altered forever in most cases. So now a lot of them do almost everything except horticulture. But once a year, they gather together in thousands over here in Nagarthpet, and they reclaim that lost cultural and social, the group identity that they once had. How do they do this? So they do this through, we start with collective memories and shared mythologies. And the amazing thing about the Karaga is it's not just one community. It's now a city spectacle. There are thousands, like I said, of people who are not all Tigalas. It involves every part of the Pete, every shop, every person here is involved. They throw themselves physically and emotionally into the festivities. This on the left-hand side is the Rathotsava of the Ranganathaswamy temple. And on the right-hand side is the Krishna temple in Nagarthpet. And as you can see, they have also moved on. So it's very interesting because they have these processions, and every year we are seeing something new. And I think this image is very evocative of how even this area is now, is moving on. It's absorbing new influences, and it's evolving, it's changing, it's very organic. So the collective memories and the shared mythologies, I'll come to that a little later. But what they also do is they use a lot of symbols, rituals. There are associations with places, and and it's all this huge mass of a shared experience, like I said, that the entire Pete takes over. So what they do is this, they create this, as the Karaga, it maps, all night. It's an all-nighter. It's actually a whole week. It ends on the last night. And they, and a few days after that, Naresh has a lot to say about it and has already told me many things about the Karaga that I didn't know earlier. And this is actually the culmination of it all. It originates far across the city as well. So on the culmination, you have all these people flocking the streets. It's a shared experience, like I said, which unites all of them, irrespective of who they are. They're all Bangaloreans. They all sort of buy into the Tigala identity. And then the Karaga weaves its way across the Pete. It maps long lost spaces, and it's like routes. We not really clear what it is, but they have a very, very specific, well designed route that he walks. This is the Karaga bearer in Jasmine. He carries the pot on his head with the sacred energy, and essentially this mythology is it originates in the Mahabharata, and they consider themselves the sons of Draupadi, who comes to visit them once a year. On the way, they stop at the Dargah. This is the Tawakkal Mastan Dargah. And so now the shared experiences are also the rituals, the symbols, the imagery, the associations all become shared with other communities. It's not just, within themselves. So at about 3 o'clock in the morning, anyone who has staked out, at this Dargah will find that it is an incredible experience. I have gone every year, and nothing prepares me each year for the time when the Veera Kumaras, who are the men with the swords and the garlands, they come into the Dargah. Now when I'm talking about rituals and symbols, this what he is doing is the Alagu Seve. So they light the camphor and they do this, it's like a choreographed movement with the swords that they all come in and do as homage to the saint. And they wear yellow, and there is a strong imagery of yellow because yellow is an antiseptic color. The Ammans from Tamil Nadu were essentially pox goddesses at one time, so yellow has implications of healing. So there is turmeric, the turmeric root that they wear around their wrist. There are lemons that they that the Karaga distributes, because lemon again is seen as antiseptic and curative. So they come into the Dargah at about 3 in the morning. They bring the processional idols from the Ranganathaswamy temple, and they settle down to wait for the Karaga to appear. And at around 4 o'clock, there is, this heightened activity, and everybody suddenly comes to life because we hear the ringing of the bell, and it's dark, and you just hear this bell in the distance, and you know that he's coming. And then he comes in, and there's pandemonium, everybody climbing on top of each other. Every square inch of space is filled, roof, windows, wherever. And he circles the Dargah 3 times. He exchanges lemons with the Khadim at the Dargah. And in the meantime, while they're waiting for him to come, the Veera Kumaras and the Khadim and everyone at Dargah, where were you last year? I went to Bombay, I didn't come. So there is a very old association that they have with this space. So he goes around 3 times and then he leaves, again leaving behind just a few jasmine petals on the floor. And when they go around with the processional idols, and you're standing on the outside here, and all you can hear from inside the Dargah are shouts of Govinda, 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 Govinda. Every year, like I said, I know it's going to happen, and still my hair stands on edge, because it is the most unlikely sound that you would expect to hear from inside the sanctum. I mean, we all respect each other's faiths, we all share it with friends and people who are close to us, but this is one of those few instances where we take our rituals into someone else's sacred space and perform it there. That is unprecedented. And so this for me is one of the biggest examples of how we actually at some point achieve a collective identity as Bangaloreans. And it's very important because it comes from a sense of sharing, a physical sharing in physical spaces that it is closely connected to. So like I said, this is Draupadi Amman with the 5 Pandavas. The Dharmarayaswamy temple is dedicated to her, and it recalls the Tigala identity and their symbolic spaces and originates in a story from the Mahabharata that's available everywhere. A lot of you might know it. And it celebrates the annual return of their mother to the city. Other communities too have reimagined Bangalore's spatiality to find a place for themselves in it, to create a sense of belonging. So this is the Alsur Pupalaki. It's under the metro, so again this image is very evocative because the chariots that come in are from areas in and around Alsur. They come in for the symbolic wedding of Someshwara and Kamakshi. It's located near the Someshwara temple in Alsur. And it's very competitive because all of them have little labels telling you where they've come from. Again, this recontextualization, this moving on is very interesting because earlier they came, lumbering on wooden chariots. Now a lot of them come in on Massey Ferguson tractors, spluttering away with kerosene and all, but they come. And so I'll just go back to that for a second. Okay, sorry. So they all huddle together under the metro before they proceed, back to the temple. And this is where, there's this huge chariot of Kamakshi and Kempamma who wait for Shiva under the Bangalore metro. And they do it, what is amazing is they're traditional communities, but they just absorb and they move on. It's like, yeah, okay, fine, enough of crying over the fact that, Alsur was once a jackfruit grove and it's not there anymore. And yeah, there were Hoblis from Kempagowda, blah, 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 blah. Finished. Let's move on now. The metro's there, let's get on with it. She has to meet him under it. So they've just done it so beautifully. And so it's the same with the Baswangudi. And this is of course this is the Eat Fest. So we have peanuts, boiled peanuts, roasted peanuts, masala peanuts. You go nuts about it. And he evidently has, as you can see, he's using his body to sell his product. So this is a gathering of farmers every year that reclaims Bangalore's agrarian past in that particular area. So again, it's connected to mythology, but and a lot of imagery, but that is what has sustained it, and that's how it endures. And again, all these that I have shown you, very often people like you and me are never seen there. So when you do go, you are, you stick out like a sore thumb, and they notice you because they know, who comes and who doesn't. And when they see you, sitting around, chatting, squatting, eating your fill of peanuts, like I said, they open up to you and they welcome you in. And that is how you really feel like you're finally on the inside of a city that we have grown up in and never really explored. So I was now thinking about this inside of the city, the sense of belonging. How does this sense of belonging happen? How do I feel like I'm a part of Bangalore? And I came upon this quote in an article in the GQ magazine by Ayaz Basrai, who incidentally spoke at the Creative Mornings in Mumbai yesterday. So he says that it's important for us to transform, because this whole sense of belonging today is under tremendous pressure. People move around often, they stay in places briefly, they're often far from home, there's increasing social fragmentation, there's physical displacement, there's cultural homogenization. So if we all wore t-shirts and, grey t-shirts and jeans and drank and held a glass of Coca-Cola in our hands, how would we know who we were, right? How would we, there were at one point some markers that told you who was who. So it's chipping away at this phenomenon. But why is belonging important, like I said? So he says that, and he places this in the urban context, he says it's very necessary for a transformation from being what he calls observers and consumers of the city experience to redefining our own spheres of influence. So in compacted cities, the spheres end within a few inches of us. And this is the biggest reason why we're comfortable keeping our own homes clean but chucking junk on the outside. It's this felt distance, which is really important, the felt distance between the city and us that breeds this apathy. So we're not just comfortable keeping our homes clean and chucking junk on the outside, but we're also comfortable when a building gets knocked down, when 800 trees get cut for road widening. I mean, who cares, right? It's not my home. It's not my tree growing on this side of my compound wall. So let's face it, change is inevitable. We tell ourselves that, we pat ourselves on the back, and we go back to sleep. But apathy that he talks about, it doesn't build vibrant cities. It doesn't create close, meaningful communities and relationships. And it does not retain talent or build economic and cultural capital. And most importantly, it just does not allow us to linger. So we run in, we run out, and we don't really care about the city anymore. So this felt distance is what needs to be bridged. But to feel comfortable here, to be happy enough to contribute to the city here, you need to assign positive values to your experiences, right, in the city. And these positive values can hopefully help from a tree being cut down or a house becoming rubble tomorrow. And how does that happen? Back to the issue of belonging. So Christian Norberg Schulz is a Norwegian architect, theorist, architectural historian. I don't know too much about it, but I just love this quote of his, which says, to belong to a place means to have an existential foothold in a concrete, everyday sense. And he works very, very deeply on the phenomena of belonging. How is that created? And he says, and he taught me, that it comes through two things. One is orientation, and the second is identification. So orientation gives you that existential foothold. It shows you how deeply you are connected, and it relies heavily on what are called on spatial structures, spatial markers. So a lot of you might know, when you move to a new city, the day you start identifying where are the one-ways, where is the cop hiding around the corner, your links, your nodal pathways, and you get a sense of the city's spatiality. You instantly, it's a slow process, but you start to feel at home. The second aspect is, once you connect to spatial structures on a physical level, it's identification. Now those physical structures have to have some meaning for you. So this is not necessarily, okay, this is where I buy my milk from, and this is where my children go to school. But meaning comes from also, and this is the route we're now going to explore, symbolic spaces, the collective memories we spoke of, that is shared experiences and stories, and shared local history. So, engaging with the past, why is it important? Of course, there are lessons to learn from the past. We normally never do. Engaging with the past influences our sense of cultural pride, a sense of legacy. We know all this. It builds a powerful connect to the present, Bangalore, our collective identity as Bangaloreans. We've gone through all that. And it also creates a link from the past to the present to the future. Much of who we are depends on the peculiar ways that we embed ourselves in time. We need to know how the world came to be and what is our place in it, right? So we have to build a context. Context builds meaning. Meaning builds value. And value builds relationships. And this is true whether it's an ideology, or it's a place, or it is a person that we want to know better. So when I do sessions with students, with very young people, younger than you, they say, oh, that's the past, that was yesterday, think about the future, why do we need to go back? And so I do this little game with them. So I'm going to do that with you before I move on. So this is Sharma Transports in Kalasipalayam. I want you to tell me how you think Sharma Transports is connected, and he is, Mr. Sharma, to Napoleon. It's not a classroom session, so you can, tell me. Does anyone know how Sharma Transports is connected to Napoleon? Anybody? No? Very close. Very, very close. So, this is the Battle of Waterloo that Napoleon lost. And he is connected to Sharma Transports because it's their office, one of their offices is very closely connected to the Bangalore Fort and Tipu's armory. So Okay. So the armory is right behind the bus, stop where they gather. And of course, the armory is where weapons were stocked during the Third and the Fourth Anglo-Mysore Wars. In the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, Tipu fought against Arthur Wellesley, who was appreciated for his efforts and went on to become the Duke of Wellington. And as we know, if we did pay attention in school, which I didn't, Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, won the Battle of Waterloo, and he fought it against Napoleon. So when you actually look at it on a very broad level, the past is the present. We're never disconnected from it, by association. We're always connected to it through meaning, through context. So when you look at time as a linear function and you say, yeah, that was then and this is now, that's not true, because even if we don't have it around us, it's still in our DNA, we have memories, we have experiences, we have connections with places we don't really probably understand, but it exists. So similarly, another one, okay, I'll give you one more chance. Hyder Ali and the masala dosa. Somebody, please, redeem yourself. No? None at all? Okay. So, Hyder Ali laid down Lal Bagh. It was the Sultan's pleasure garden, but when Bangalore became a cantonment, it was transferred. It became a British economic garden. It was re-laid out by Benjamin Haynes. He was a Tranquebar botanist. And he he grew a lot of, he altered it, to a certain extent, from being just a pleasure garden to what I call an economic garden, because now it grew produce for the military and for the city of Bangalore. So he introduced the potato to the city, which was grown outside Nandi Hills. And the rest, of course, is history. If we didn't have that potato, then what would MTR serve us on a Sunday morning, right? So that is what goes into the masala dosa. So the next time you eat that potato in Bangalore, you must remember Hyder Ali, because if it wasn't for Lal Bagh, we wouldn't have that dosa with the filling. So indirectly, if you really look back and you play this game constantly in your lives, you'll find that we're always connected to something centuries ago. Somehow there are connections. We may not be experiencing them physically right now, but they exist. So if we say that the past is redundant, then I beg to differ, because this is just a small example of Tipu's rockets. That is a rocket man. He was called a Juke, and this is his one of his rockets. And both Hyder and Tipu were one of the first to use rockets for warfare, because when gunpowder was invented in China, they used it mainly for fireworks and other ornamental reasons. They're considered to be the pioneers in rocket projectile technology. And 2 specimens of this are preserved, and a picture of the rockets being used in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War hangs. Apparently it hangs, that's what Google tells me, at the headquarters in NASA. And it's a long story. This is a completely different presentation of how from that elementary structure that was fired from a little mound, innovations and developments went on to take it far, far from where it was today. But if we didn't have the past, right, then we wouldn't actually have the present and the future either. So I still kept thinking about this, about the relevance of it. And one morning I was standing with a friend outside my favorite place in Bangalore. This is the Bangalore Fort. It is said to have been built either by Chikkadevaraja Wadiyar or by Kempegowda. We still don't know for sure yet. Nobody does. I was sitting at the ASI library one day with a colleague of mine, and we were sitting back to back and going through, feverishly trying to figure out who built this. And she's from behind me said, you know what, it's Kempegowda. I found this book that says Kempegowda. And I said, you know what, this one says Chikkadevaraja Wadiyar. So we still don't know who it is. So we just say that, it was built by either one of them, and it stands in the heart of busy Kalasipal. So we were standing out there. She was a photographer. We saw people go in and out in exactly 10 to 15 minutes flat, and she said, is there nothing to see inside? Why are they coming out so fast? There's a little stone plaque over there that tells you when it was built, but it doesn't tell you the stories and the meanings of the fort, and there are many. So I said, it depends, on what it is you can see. So we went in and we came out in an hour and a half. This story led to a project called The Tiger Comes to Town, which I facilitated when I worked with at Shrishti in Yelahanka. It was called The Tiger Comes to Town, like I said, and luckily for us, it was the 150th anniversary of the ASI. And so they had a space. They said, you know, we want people in different cities to do something to celebrate heritage, but we don't have the bandwidth and the time. So if you are willing to take this on, great, we'll give you the fort. I mean, how often do I get a fort, right? So I said, yeah, sure. But we realized that I had design students to work with, and this was historical material that they were going to engage with. So we started with the poster. We had to create a pitch, and then I got them, everybody who signed on, to send me a postcard. Because if we're talking about the past and its connection to the present, I didn't want an email saying, yeah, I'm on. So they actually had to go to the post office and get that postcard stamped and send it to me. So the idea of the project was to connect the public to Bangalore's local history and heritage sites, as well as identify more relatable contemporary ways to maintain this involvement with the past. So there were a lot of things that happened over 6 months. The students went on walks. That's Arun, who flagged it off with a beautiful Bangalore walk on Avenue Road. That's Suresh, who a lot of you might know. He took them on a visual walk through Sampangiram Nagar on local imagery, signage, symbolism. And they mapped the site and they went on a field trip to Srirangapatna. So right now they were completely, you know, engaging with material and text and archives and stuff, and they would come back and tell me, you know, all kinds of things that they had discovered. I was a little apprehensive because they said we're design students, we don't read, we don't engage with text. So I said, oh God, you know, this is all about reading. So we went on a field trip to Srirangapatna, and something changed. When we went to Srirangapatna, they were full of information and dates and places and people and chatter all the way through on the bus. Then we reached the mausoleum where Tipu is buried. And when they went in and they came out, they were silent. And they were silent on the way on the bus back. And I was like worried. And then they said, when we stopped to eat, they said, you know, up to now, history was just words for us, you know, that we read. But stepping into the mausoleum and the way it feels, the people who come in, the kind of feeling that they bring with them, and he's lying there between his parents. I mean, he had parents. I said, yeah, that's surprising but true. Between his father and mother, he's lying there. They said, he just seems real. And finally I said, you know what, hallelujah, you know, there is a connect that has happened here. And then everything changed. That was like the turning point, that physical visit to a space. So while there are many ways of building identity and connect, I have always, like I told you, been interested in the power of place. So then they came back and they went on to actually translate that information into different things. So there was a performance technique workshop that they went through to understand delivery, dialogue. They went through a docent walk training, which was to be guides. They took over about 250 Bangaloreans over a weekend on the 19th and the 20th of October in 2012 on guided walks around the fort over one weekend. They worked on a shadow play. So they looked at different mediums, audio, performance, and design, and they scripted, designed shadow puppets. They produced a soundscape about the Battle of Bangalore. This was for children, school children. And we were very particular, and I insisted that it's not just going to be English-speaking students. It has to be disadvantaged children, children from different institutions who work with underprivileged children, government school children. So we did this in English and Kannada because, hey, it's as much their fort as it is ours, right? And they worked on building collateral. So they did a booklet about the fort different aspects of the 18th century and how the fort was located in it, and so the information panels broke up that information, and we also had a little merchandise. There were t-shirts that the team wore and everything. So those are panels from the shadow play, and we had them taking students and other people from Bangalore on a walk. Then in phase 2, we had city stakeholders stepping in. So we had a site-specific theatre performance called Tiger Tiger by Bangalore Little Theatre. I went through the same thing again. I had actors who engaged with the script. They were looking for subtext. They were thinking about, Tipu, we read this about him. Hyder Ali didn't have any hair. He shaved every day. Oh, that's wonderful. And then they went to Srirangapatna. They chattered in the bus all the way there. They came back quiet. And it was unbelievable that there were two different groups of people, and it was the same space that impacted them in exactly the same way. They came back quiet, and suddenly the enormity of what they had volunteered to do fell on their heads. So they realized that they were actually going to be people who were lying dead over there. And they were going to be those people in a place where they had walked. So the guy who was playing Tipu said, what if I don't do him right? I said, there'll be a rock that will dislodge itself and fall on your head, and the spirits will speak. So they were suddenly overwhelmed, by this whole physical experience that they were undergoing. Till then, they didn't have any sense of it. It's just another script. And then we actually did the play. And there is the first scene where Fakhrunisa, his mother, comes in. She's got this little candle. She walks there and, on cue, she lights it, and the azan goes. We managed to get the cues right. The azan went. She dropped it. Hyder Ali walked in, and there was this pause, and somewhere in the city there was an azan that started. It was surreal. Because it was open air, it was a cold December night, the fort looked beautiful, it had been lit up. And so they stopped, and she said, wait, truth of the moment, waited for that azan to finish, and then we continued. Then we came to the battle scenes, and there, Purnaya is standing, and he's telling Tipu, he says, Sire, do you see the tower of Somwarpet, falling in the distance? And the breeze started, and there they were with their hair and their costumes being whipped up, and the moon sailed across the sky, and I said, oh dear, this is like really a public history project, because we had so many stakeholders. We had an educational institution, Shrishti. We had a government organization, the Archaeological Survey of India, who were our collaborators. We had the cultural community represented. We had the student community represented. We had a lecture series with the Vishveshwaraya Institute of Technology, and dealt with the science and technology in the 18th century. A science center, and at this point Ganjam stepped in, the jewelry house, and they said, this is also our anniversary, and we have a very strong historical connect with the artisan village of Ganjam in Srirangapatna, so we would like to take on the cost of this entire production, which was quite immense, because the fort, as you might know if you've been there, has not even a chair or a rock or a bathroom to sit on. So you have to put in performance infrastructure from scratch, which was very, very expensive. And they just took it on, and everybody came together. Bangalore took it over. They blogged about it. The newspapers wrote about it. And it was quite a tremendous experience for us. When people talk about apathy, it just changed. Always. We have to leave a mark. So, at the end of the project, we sat with them in the fort for feedback, and the students said that the mapping exercises created intimacy. They created a personal relationship with the space. They used words like ownership, a sense of protectiveness. They had a sense of being on the inside now. And they said, the way I see the city has changed. Bangalore will never be the same for me. And I had actually all the ingredients in place. I had a spatial structure, the fort. I had meaning. It was the site of the last spirited defense in the Deccan before it completely opened its gates to the East India Company. I had meaning, which I just told you. I had information. It was the site of the Third Anglo-Mysore War. And I also had apathy. I had 11 students who lived in Yelahanka. 9 out of them were not from Bangalore. they were from out of town, 2 were from Bangalore, but all of them lived in Yelahanka on campus. So there was a huge physical disconnect from the city. But now in the course of the project, they were wandering around, they were speaking to people, they were overcoming barriers of caste, language, community. A lot of them, their idea of mixing with the locals was, I speak to the guard at the gate, that was fine. In one of the projects, she said, I actually spoke to him to ask him about the area. So they didn't extend themselves till this point. And so this was really meaningful for me because it proved a point that we can achieve this through information. And so, because it was a public history project and the entire city got together, we realized that cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody. So, after having said all this, I come to the last, bits of thinking that I underwent. For a while, I'd been experiencing this curious sense of physical isolation, alienation in Bangalore. I couldn't identify with the city anymore. Things, my physical and cultural markers were disappearing around me. The area that I lived in, had suddenly, transformed into a mall. The chai curry guy that I bought sweets from as a child, he disappeared. The houses that I had played in suddenly became high rises. I couldn't find anything to connect. I was completely lost. I said, where is this Bangalore that I belong to? Where do I find it? So I think that's why when old Bangaloreans get together, we all get lost in sentimental nostalgia. It's just probably a way of coping with loss. So while I alternated between grieving and ranting and raving, like I said, the physical and cultural markers of my existence in this city were disappearing every day. The past was being literally sacrificed at the altar of the present, and it was not a very pretty picture. So this is the Renuka theatre that I grew up with. My mother grew up with it too. She said it was a lodge in Shivajinagar. And a couple of months ago I went past and Renuka was gone. And in its place was this. Gone. Just gone overnight. The demolition guys do such an amazing job, you can blink and it's gone. And sometimes I wonder how they feel, because they're in a way, paid vultures to a certain extent. They do a job, but they do it really well. And this is the Muhammad Ali building. This is on Veerapillai Street. Now this is really interesting because the first time I went past it, I thought, I'll just show them that. Gone! This too, gone! Overnight in the last 4 months, I spoke to them, I was here 3-4 months ago, it's gone. So we went back a few days ago. It was raining, which is why this image is so blurred. And then I said, okay, let's go in, to this ghastly little place. And I found, I know the family. I know the problems they have. A lot of people, we can all sentimentalize old structures, but they cost a lot to maintain. They are very difficult to live in. And at the end of the day, it's a huge amount of property, right? And we could all do with a little extra money. So what they've done is, they've taken the courtyard. I'll just go back to the previous image. This courtyard, and they have very cleverly sandwiched the shopping center bang in the middle of the courtyard. It's obviously a cheap, temporary thing. The walls are just about, 5 inches thick. It's just little boxes. They have kept the periphery. There's about 4 feet of a gap between the shopping center and this is extremely important because this was one of the last surviving mews in Bangalore. These at the bottom were stables where, landed gentry rode into town, they stabled horses. Sometimes, the ostlers and everybody, just like they did in London, they lived on the top. And then it was built by Yajaman Muhammad Ali, who was a wealthy businessman and philanthropist. He didn't see it as a mews, but it was actually built along the lines of one. The family still lives upstairs. So they've managed to find a way to make the building generate revenue, and still the upstairs, thankfully, is intact and they still live there. Now they could have taken help. They could have spoken to someone. This could have been a more aesthetic venture. They didn't. It sits very, very badly with the rest of the shell, but they at least had the sense not to knock it down. And this, fortunately, still exists. And this is the reason why I'm speaking to you. Because urban forms are made out of not only material and things, but out of meanings, language, and symbols. It can be relatively easy to knock down a building. Imagine this going someday. But it is much harder to demolish a space which is composed around experience, memory, and imagination. This is, there were losses, as you can see, but there have also been a few minuscule gains. So this is in Malleshwaram, and we of course have a beautiful building. Thank you, Naresh, for keeping it going. And we also have Raintree. And so there is a way. There is a way. We just have to find it. It takes a little time, a little effort. You need to do a little homework. So there is a way to make it happen. So, you know, cities around the world, city stakeholders around the world have figured out that there is a way. And the way is to create utility value for the past. You have to monetize it. If you don't monetize it, it will not happen. It will just lie there. It will be meaningless and it will go. So, you know, we need to build, like they do, an entire museum out of the chair that George Washington sat on. This is the chair he sat on. And there's memorabilia, and there is Washington t-shirts and Washington mugs and a space dedicated to the chair. We need to build stories around things. But then you see, we have heritage pouring out of our ears. We prick it and it's in us, so we tend to take it for granted. We don't see it the way other people do who don't have it. Modern cities who don't have it value it. And alongside, you know, repurposing the physical, we, in our ways, can also become custodians and messengers of meaning, right? So you can preserve those photos, you can listen to family stories, you can share them, and we can all hold on to what's left. And now what I do, the last part of this, is I work with the relationship that we have with history, culture, and places through experiences. So this is Native Place. For me, it's symbolic because, you know, I work with the local, I work with places, and how we can have more meaning through information. And the information comes through documentation projects. We do visual walks, not heritage walks. So these are mapping exercises that allow you to look and see the city differently. So they are theme-based, so you can decide whether you want to do, like, for example, a sensory experience of Avenue Road, or you want to look at it as a site of transformation, or through people and processions. So if it's a large enough group or an institution, we put together these experiences for you. So it's interactive. You don't get rushed from one place to the other once you know who built it and in which year. You stop, you talk, you eat, you experience. It takes time, but if you have it, then the city waits for you. And we're looking at building collateral. It's right now an AIM office entity, so we work largely with partnerships and collaborations. Anybody who wants to come along, has an interesting idea, most welcome right now, because it's very young and very small. And why I'm working with information is because, so you might, the Yelahanka Gate Anjaneya temple may mean nothing to you, as Bangaloreans and non-Bangaloreans alike. But one day, I might tell you that this is where the Yelahanka Gate is said to have stood, and it marked one of 9 that led into the mud fort around the Pete that Kempegowda is said to have built in 1537. So now you know that. The next time you drive past, you might want to look at it again. The next time you might want to tell someone, oh, you know, this is where Kempegowda built the gate. This is the Yelahanka Gate, you know, like really casually. Now you're the custodian of that information. And then you might assign a value to it because it makes you feel good, right? You know it, you've created a connect to it. And a connect, like I said, to Bangalore's past would have been made through the present. And sometimes, just sometimes, it can change the way you see the city.
Thank you once again.